Psalm 60. Preserve me, O God, for in you I put my trust. O my soul, you said the Lord, Yah, my Lord, my goodness is nothing apart from you. As for the saints who are on the earth, they are the excellent ones, in whom is my delight. The soul shall be multiplied who hasten after another God. They drink offerings of blood I would not offer, nor take up the names on my lips. O Lord, you are the portion of my inheritance and my cup. You maintain my lot. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Yes, I have a good inheritance. I have blessed the Lord has given me counsel. My heart also instructs me in the night seasons. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is my right hand, I shall not be moved. Therefore, my heart is glad, my glory rejoices. My flesh also rests in hope. For you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will allow your Holy One to see corruption. You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Hallelujah. Okay, so Psalm 16 is quite a prophetic psalm. Certainly, some parts of the psalm refer to exclusively to Jesus Christ. Other parts can be referred to David, but there's certainly for some exclusivity in relation to Christ, Christ's incarnation, his burial, his death, burial, and resurrection. For example, you can see in verse 10, you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will allow your Holy One to see corruption. Obviously, David's body saw corruption, but Jesus Christ, the Holy One, capital H, capital O, it's referring to Christ here. See here, Amos he says, you are my Lord, my goodness is nothing apart from you. So yeah, you certainly see prophecy, prophetic references to Christ. But we can also apply that some of these in like in David's life and even some other people's lives, biblical and non-biblical characters. This psalm is referred to in the book of Acts, chapter 2, and I think 13 as well. We'll quickly go to those. Acts chapter 2, 25. For David says concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoiced, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, my flesh will also rest in hope. For you not leave my soul in Hades. It's a bit different to Sheol, but same meaning. Nor will allow your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of joy in your presence. So clearly referring to Psalm 16. Acts 13:35. Therefore, he also says another Psalm, Psalm 16. You will not allow your Holy One to see corruption. So there's clear reference there to the Psalm 16. It's a psalm also that's full of as we see here. Just get it quickly. It's a psalm that does have many references that we can apply. In verse 2, it talks about it being like in need of the Lord. I mentioned that the portion, inheritance, and the land and the lot. So here it says, verse 5, O Lord, you're the portion of my inheritance and my cup, you maintain my lot. And the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. So this is referring to the physical inheritance, physical like possession. And Christ is the one, God is the one who is our inheritance. He is our portion. We're not interested so much in a physical possession. We're interested in attaining the presence of God, which is much more important, especially see towards the end, in your presence fullness of joy. We want the presence of God. We don't want a physical like possession. Don't want to limit to that. We want to attain His presence. You can see it does mention that in some in Numbers 18:20. Then the Lord said to Aaron, "You shall have no inheritance in their land, nor shall you have any portion among them. I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel." That's what we want. That's what we want. We want to have the God as being our inheritance and our portion and our cup. Cup is just the same thing. Just like referring to in Psalm 23, the cup, my cup runs over. I'm being filled with God's presence. It's overflowing with God's presence, overflowing with God's grace. And even the lines, that's how they used to divide it up in the time. They have like lines to show the possession, like who owns this, or who inherits this kind of area, this kind of land. Okay, but of course we want to obtain the internal inheritance, the God's presence, which is much more important. You see, also that reminds me of the gleaning. There's a law of gleaning in the book of Leviticus, which talks about the inheritance, and God is the one who is, we want to obtain God's inheritance, and God is the owner, of course. It's like in tithing, we're giving money back to God. It's not our money. But also in our land, it's God's land, it's God's inheritance. And the edges of the land, the gleaning, we offer up to God, and we offer up the harvest. So not just the edges of the land, and in this area there'll be livestock, there'll be harvest, I should say. So you can see that in Leviticus. So Leviticus 19:9, when you reap the harvest of your land, like your inheritance, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. And you shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So the collection here of the gleaning, the collection of the gleaning, of the edges of the land, has to go to God. Has to go to God. All right, that reminds me of what we're reading in Psalm 16. Verse 7 refers to the night. My heart also instructs me in the night seasons. Me and my mom were translating a book, Abuna Ammonius Suriani, a book about him, Rahib Nasak, the ascetic monk. And one of the ascetic things he did was have late night showers, if you can call it like it's not a really typical shower back then, but he would do it when everyone's asleep. He wouldn't want to show his asceticism, and so he mentions in the book about how Saint Isaac really emphasized how nighttime is an important time to do spiritual activities, or do things for God, and so he mentions that in the book. And we mentioned about Saint Isaac before, how he talks about up the nighttime, how nighttime is a very important time to pray. And we see in verse 8 talking about the right hand. And the right hand is really mentioned, of course, throughout the Bible. And here, obviously, Christ is is the right hand of the Father. And we also want to be on the right hand of the Father. We want to be in heaven. And Christ says, I will hold you by my right hand. In a lovely psalm. So we know that Psalm 73 is lovely. Nevertheless, I'm continually with you. Hold me by my right hand. You will guide me with the counsel and after receive me to glory. So I love this psalm talking about being in God's right hand and being held by God's right hand. And we're just like Christ is one, of course, who is set at the right hand of the Father, sits at the right hand of the Father. So we want to do that. And these are lovely verses, the concluding verse, Psalm 73, which I'm sure you've read before. Nothing's better than being in the right hand, being in the palm of God's hand. The book Heaven is for Real, which is controversial, but I think it's biblically and significantly accurate. That when he has a vision of heaven, goes up to heaven, and he has sitting at the right hand of the Father. He's got his own special chair to the right of the hand of the Father. So I think that's nice to contemplate on. The last verse, you will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. This really just proves that Christ is the way and the truth and the life. Outside of that, there is no life. It is lifeless. It becomes things like inanimate. There's no life, and without me you can do nothing. It really is true. Without Christ, there is no meaning. There is no significance. You can't do anything significant for God. And people can delude themselves and trick themselves and lie to themselves and deceive themselves. And really, they really say that I have life, I have meaning, I have purpose outside of Christ, and you don't need God to have meaning and purpose, which is absolutely false. Um, and in the end, it's just vanity of vanities. All is vanity without God, essentially. So the real life is being in God's presence and experiencing joy in being one with Christ. You may be living, but you're spiritually dead, which is much more significant. Um, and I just want to say that, like, the being in God's presence is fullness of joy. That doesn't mean, as you know, that you could ask, okay, but look how much tribulation people have. Look at how much tribulation David had. How can you say he had fullness of joy when he was under so much tribulation? How was that an easy, joyful life? Well, it's not an easy life, that's for sure, but it's still joyful. The tribulation, and even non-Christians will know, can really build up a person, and they learn from them, become a better person, stronger person, stronger person mentally, psychologically, if they learn from it and apply it in the appropriate way. So imagine when a Christian goes through tribulation and he's being held in God's right hand in his palm, and then he can really build and learn from that and move forward and experience joy, because it's joyful to be in God's presence. There's nothing more joyful, nothing more sweet. Taste and see that the Lord is good. That doesn't negate the tribulation, doesn't negate the difficulty. Life is difficult. But at the same time, we have to stress that life is joyful with God. But of course, we look to the heavenly. Our citizenship is in heaven, so we look to that. So we don't want to overemphasize that we should live for today and live for the joy now. No, because life on earth it's full of toil, man's life full of toil and tribulation. But if God is directing that, we can experience the true joy and smile, especially when we're looking towards Him. We have thanksgiving for that. So I wanted to emphasize that. Of course, a famous book on this topic of presence is Brother Lawrence, Practicing the Presence of God. I'll read like maybe one or two quotes only of that. Um, he was very big on the mysticism. Mysticism is just focusing on God. It's you and God. Just like it's Psalm 73, whom have I of heaven but you? I've got no one else but you. So I'll read one or two quotes. There is not in the world a kind of life more sweet and delightful than that of a continual communion with God. That's great. Nothing more sweet and delightful, joyful, than that of continual communion with God, being in God's presence. Nothing. Only those who practice and experience it can comprehend it. So the world won't understand when you tell them there's nothing more joyful than being in God's presence and nothing more sweet. It's meaningless to them if they haven't experienced it. Instead, they have to experience it to understand it. You can tell people, uh, uh, it's nothing greater than doing skydiving. But if someone doesn't go out and jump and do skydiving, they're not going to understand. So one has to experience God's presence and joy and communion and being in communion with God to really taste it. Only those who practice it, yet I do not advise you to do it for that motive. It is not pleasure that we should seek in this exercise. We should do it from principle love and because God would have us do it. So it's great. It's great. He was a great example of experiencing God's presence at all times. As much as he led this way, and he emphasized that we should try and experience it at all times. Even when he was in the kitchen, when he was doing these jobs, he talked about how to practice the presence of God as a starter. And yeah, you got people like Gregory of Nyssa, very big on mysticism, all these big quotes. And he said like one quote, um, like I was on top of a mountain, and there was nothing more joyful than knowing there was just like me and God. Kind of like in astronomy, like when you do astronomy, it's like you and the moon, and obviously God created the moon, so it's like you and God. You're like the only one experiencing it. It's mystical, mystical. And Gregor Manissa, he talks about how really this is the only world that matters. This mystical world, not the world on earth, not the world on earth, which doesn't have joy. Okay, um, and we don't have pleasures because it says at your right hand a pleasure forevermore, at God's right hand. But outside of that, it's temporary pleasure, temporary pleasure. One more quote. One more quote is from the Case for Faith, which is talking about how God's presence is the answer to like tribulation, like the answer. Um, so I'll read maybe one quote. Um, as we look at human relationships, what we see is that lovers, like people that love each other, don't want explanations but presence. And what God is essentially is presence. And then it goes on. That's why God is infinite joy. And insofar as we can participate in that presence, being in God's presence, we too have infinite joy. And he uses the example of Job. Okay? And he sees like God face to face, so to speak. Okay? And the answer to suffering then is the answerer, Jesus himself, the Word of God. Okay? Being in God's right hand. So I think that's lovely. I can share maybe the quotes by Gregory Reeser and other mystical fathers that talk about mysticism, but I think that's a nice